Johnny Appleseed had the eye of a speculator, of a land speculator, the heart of a philanthropist, the courage of a frontiersman, and the wonder and instincts of a Bedouin. And there's something there for everybody. And all that was captured in the first iteration of the myth, which was in Harper's Magazine in 1871. You know, the mythical Johnny Appleseed is really an extension of the eccentricities and oddities of the real John Chapman. A guy named Banning Norton, who was an Ohio historian in 1862, called him the oddest man in all our history. And to be called the oddest man in all the history of a frontier, a place that was still coming out from being a frontier, is a high honor indeed. There are multiple myths of Johnny Appleseed, and everything about him tended to get a little bit exaggerated. A man who grew beautiful apples on lovely trees, who was almost simple-minded when you look at it, who sort of chirped around all day long singing and, talked to the birds and did various other things. He as a man was much more complicated than this chirpy little thing. Well, for one thing, he was absolutely filthy. He was 6 feet. He rarely shaved, rarely combed his hair. He was scrawny, as you might expect from a man who'd walked 25,000 miles and ate mostly berries and nuts and things like that. And he liked to chew tobacco. He didn't mind a drink apparently occasionally. So he wasn't the saint in that regard. There were three sides of Chapman. One, he was a land speculator, like everybody else in the frontier. Two, he was a nurseryman, an apple tree grower. And three, he was a religious zealot. And in every one of those categories, there were eccentricities. And the myths that grew up around him were, in a way, extensions of all those things. When the Ohio Company would give, say, 100 acres to a settler, one of their requirements often was they had to plant 50 apple trees and 20 peach trees within 3 years. They didn't say what kind of apple trees they had to be, they just had to plant the apple trees. So John Chapman had an uncanny sense for where and at what pace the frontier was moving. And he would go out 2 years ahead, up a stream, wherever he thought the frontier was going to go. He'd clear some land and he'd plant these apple seeds. When the settlers got there, this is a guy waiting with trees to sell, and they had to put 50 trees in. So it was a great business model. As for the trees themselves, apple growers graft trees for a reason. Because if you graft a tree, you know what kind of apple is going to grow in that tree because you grafted it from a Golden Delicious, or you grafted it from a Macintosh, or you grafted it from. Apple seeds are something called heterozygous, which means they contain in their genetic makeup the possibility of every apple variety ever grown. So you have no idea what you're going to get. When you plant by seed, they tend to go back to revert to the earliest apple trees. So the apples his trees produced mostly were not apples you and I would want to take to our second grade teacher. They were hard little apples, but nobody cared. They were going to be used for cider. They were going to be processed. It wasn't like people sat down and apple pie every night in the frontier. What they needed were two things. They needed vinegar, apple cider vinegar, because vinegar was the essential medicine of the frontier, good for everything that ailed you basically, and hard cider, because first of all, the water wasn't safe to drink for the most part in these frontier cabins, and secondly, people just drank an enormous amount in the frontier in Ohio. Somebody did an estimate that the average Ohioan, this is about 1830 I think, age 15 and older, drank 9 gallons of whiskey a year and 30 gallons of hard cider, and then plus some wine. Well, it works out to a pretty good dose for every man, woman, and child. So there were cider apples for both medicine and, to the extent that alcohol was healthier to drink than water, a second kind of medicine. Even his theology was a lot more complicated. He was a follower of the Church of the New Jerusalem, which was one of these sort of small churches that sprang up in the New World in actually the late 1700s. What happens is that the Church of the New Jerusalem begins to pick up his saintliness, and they published in the late 18-teens this sort of tract about this person who's living in the wilds of Ohio, who is almost incorporeal. He has almost no bodily wants and needs. John Chapman died March of 1845 along the St. Joseph River a few miles north of Fort Wayne, Indiana. The thing is, he didn't die, of course. He kept showing up because he had really, in a way, he'd become his myth even in his lifetime. And I think I can make an argument that he was complicit in his own myth-making, that he wanted to disappear into Johnny Appleseed, and he did disappear into Johnny Appleseed. And there were accounts that went on for years afterward. He'd sired a son by a Native American woman in Missouri. He was spotted in Oregon. He was spotted on Lookout Mountain during the Battle Above the Clouds in the Civil War. He kept appearing places, and of course he still keeps appearing.